Brian Wilson, co-founder of the Beach Boys, dies at 82. Brian Wilson, co-founder of the Beach Boys, has died, according to social media posts from his family. The Papa Tour, known for his complex studio creations, was 82. On his official Facebook and Instagram pages, his family posted, "We are heartbroken to announce that our beloved father Brian Wilson has passed away. We are at a loss for words right now. Please respect our privacy at this time as our family is grieving. We realize that we are sharing our grief with the world. Love and mercy." At the time of his death, Wilson was under a conservatorship following the death of his wife of 28 years, Melinda Ledbetter, in January 2024. She had cared for Wilson, who had an unspecified neurocognitive disorder similar to dementia, which rendered him unable to properly provide for his own personal needs, according to court documents. Before his marriage to Melinda in 1995, Wilson had also been in a conservatorship due to declining health, decades of drug use, and mental health struggles. He had been diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, a combination of schizophrenia and a mood disorder, as well as mild bipolar disorder. He first visited a psychiatrist in 1964, according to his autobiography.
I was a druggie when I should have been a father.
The Beach Boys were as beloved and critically adored as the Beatles. As their name implies, the band was a soundtrack for fun in the sun with hits like Surfin' USA, I Get Around, and Fun, Fun, Fun. However, they didn't begin with that image. Originally called the Pendletons, their first label, Candix Records, renamed them the Beach Boys. Ironically, Brian didn't even surf, but he crafted the Surfer Boy image on albums like Surfer Girl and Surfin' a Safari, thanks to his astonishing ear for vocal arrangements. Bob Dylan once told Newsweek, "That ear, I mean Jesus, he's got to will that to the Smithsonian." In 1964, during a European tour, Wilson suffered a panic attack, marking the beginning of his long mental health struggles, including auditory hallucinations. This incident changed the band's trajectory, with Wilson increasingly focusing on studio work. That led to 1966's Pet Sounds, considered one of the greatest albums of all time. Though it was a commercial disappointment upon release, it featured timeless tracks like God Only Knows. Wilson had planned an equally ambitious follow-up, Smile, which he called A Teenage Symphony to God. But the album was cancelled in 1967, and Wilson was hospitalized the following year.
Did you live in fear of your father?
Yeah.
How did you get away from that?
When the Beach Boys came
The
along.
1970s were tumultuous for Wilson, marked by addiction, estrangement from his bandmates, and a controversial psychologist whose license was eventually revoked. Starting in 1988, Wilson went solo, eventually reviving his lost masterpiece Smile for live audiences with 2004's Brian Wilson Present Smile, earning widespread acclaim. That same year, the Beach Boys were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, with Wilson recognized as one of the few undisputed geniuses in popular music. In a 2004 interview with the Washington Post, he said, "I've been called a genius, but I don't know. People admire me, and that makes me feel good. It makes me feel like I have a purpose. I could not express how thankful I am to have that kind of thing in my life." Despite their success, the Beach Boys story is not entirely happy. Murray Wilson, a legacy of abused Murray Wilson, father of Brian, Dennis, and Carl, and their first manager, was a deeply abusive figure. In I Am Brian Wilson, a memoir, Brian recalled, "My dad was violent. He was cruel." As a child, Brian lost hearing in one ear after being struck with a lead pipe by his father. All the boys endured physical abuse. Brian once received a beating with a 2x4. Dennis was the only one who ever fought back. The psychological torment was just as cruel. Murray would remove his glass eye and force the boys to stare into the empty socket. He also constantly berated them during his time as their manager. In 2010, The Guardian reported the discovery of a handwritten letter Murray sent to Brian on May 8, 1965. Despite the band's chart-topping success, it read, "It has become very apparent to me that the family cannot exist under the worrisome and trying conditions that have been going on for the last 5 or 6 years. No matter how many hit songs you write or how many hundreds of thousands of dollars you may earn, you are going to suffer remorse." Brian's demons and isolation. Brian Wilson became increasingly reclusive, even as he continued to write songs. According to The Independent, his favorite writing spot was a grand piano in a sandbox at his Los Angeles home, where he could feel the sand under his feet. There, he composed and arranged music for 9 consecutive gold albums, doing everything except writing the lyrics. He frequently used amphetamines, LSD, morphine, and alcohol. Wilson became paranoid, convinced he was being bugged, and would only meet people by his swimming pool. When forest fires coincided with him writing the song Fire, he began to believe his music was influencing real-world events. He started hearing voices, some loving, others threatening to kill him. By age 25, Wilson had largely disappeared from public life. The Mansons and the Beach Boys. The saga of Charles Manson and his family intersected strangely with the Beach Boys. In the summer of 1968, drummer Dennis Wilson became involved with the Manson clan, lost in months of drug-fueled debauchery after picking up some Manson followers hitchhiking. Manson had musical ambitions of his own, which deepened his connection with Dennis, but the association quickly turned dark as Manson's notoriety escalated into infamy.
On our way back to the studio at Brian's house where we were recording, I said, well, Dennis, you really have an interesting character on your hands now.
Manson started showing Dennis how to play guitar. The hooks were in. They even lived together, on Dennis's dime, until things suddenly went sour. Dennis offered Manson the opportunity to hit the recording studio, but when the producers tried to make some changes to his music, Manson pulled out a knife. The entire episode left a lasting impact, as did the legendary events that took place soon after. Even though Dennis vowed never to speak of his time with Charles Manson, Mike Love mentioned the episode in his memoir Good Vibrations. He wrote, "The guilt was devastating. Dennis was shaken to the core. He carried that guilt with him for the last 14 years of his life." A Day at the Zoo Pet Sounds was an iconic album, and that cover is pretty iconic too. It was shot at the San Diego Zoo, and the San Diego Tribune reports that the cover was rumored to be a direct message to their rivals, the animals. Whatever their motivation for shooting that cover at the zoo, the whole thing didn't go too well. Ultimately, the Beach Boys were banned from ever setting foot in the zoo again. There's a long list of bizarre shenanigans that went on during their visit. Names aren't named, but someone thought it was a brilliant idea to bounce a carrot off a tiger's head. Someone else tried to manhandle an antelope. Somehow, they got hold of a few puppies and baby chicks, leaving them in strategic places around the zoo. Meanwhile, the band claimed that they were the ones really suffering, with the goats that made it onto the final album cover said to be particularly awful. But those puppies probably felt differently. Dennis Deet. It was Christmas Day, 1983, when, according to Rolling Stone, Dennis Wilson was turned away from the detox unit at a California hospital. One doctor allegedly claimed he was just too much trouble to deal with. Dennis was dead 3 days later. He drowned in the waters of Marina del Rey, where he'd been hanging out with friends, drinking, and diving off a boat called Emerald. He had a blood alcohol content of 0.26 when he made his final dive and didn't come up again. He was 39 years old. The years leading up to that day were rough. As early as 1963, his spot at the drums was being filled by a studio drummer. By 1979, Dennis was finally kicked out of the band. Prior to that, Wilson had started using heroin. He was the abuser in a relationship with actress Karen Lamb, whom he once nearly killed with a gun. He torched a Ferrari, checked in and out of hospitals, and destroyed Christy McVie's house, all while on alcohol and drug-fueled rages. Then there was the last straw. Dennis hooked up with his second cousin, the 16-year-old daughter of Mike Love. That went over about as well as you might expect. Restraining orders were issued between the two bandmates. After that, there were more drugs, more alcohol, and when Dennis died, the band announced they wouldn't be disbanding. They only took a short break to mourn.
Landy would let Brian record with us only if Landy could be the co-writer or the co-producer of the record.
But what about Mike Love, cousin to the brothers and lead vocalist on songs like California Girls and I Get Around? When he talked to Rockler in 2016, they touched on what seemed to be an apt description of his dual personality, the switchblade and the butterfly. While Love admitted that his particular sense of humor could come off as crass at times, he claimed a lot of what he's done has all been in good fun. At least, that's what he says. Given how many times he's taken Brian to court, you can see how people would be mistaken. Love told Rockler that his main lawsuit against Brian stemmed from a single issue, his claim that he wrote a number of Beach Boys songs, including Surfin' USA and Help Me Rhonda, but was never given songwriting credit. I'm not taking credit for Brian's brilliant arrangements or production or anything like that, and I'm not saying I could have done it on my own. I'm saying that there was not an accurate picture of who did what when it came to the creation of these songs. The 1992 lawsuit was just one of many, and one of the main reasons he's been labeled the villain of the Beach Boys. Love feels this reputation isn't deserved and told Rolling Stone that, while he laughs off all the hate most of the time, it does sometimes break him. In 1988, Kokomo shot to the top of the charts, 24 years and 4 months after the Beach Boys' first chart topper, I Get Around. There's not much these two songs have in common, and there's a pretty good reason for that. Kokomo was written for Tom Cruise's movie Cocktail, and it wasn't written by the musical genius behind most of the Beach Boys songs either. According to Entertainment Weekly, you can blame a number of different writers and musicians, including Mike Love, for Kokomo, a song that's probably stuck in your head right now. At the time, Brian was under the constant supervision of psychotherapist Eugene Landy, who forbade Brian's initial involvement with the song, although he did show up in the video. One Island was briefly renamed after the success of the song. Carl Wilson died in 1998, only a few months after touring with the band for their 36th annual summer tour. The official cause of death was complications from lung cancer, although he had also previously been diagnosed with brain cancer. Wilson was only 51 years old. Obituaries, historians, and those who knew him remembered him as the group's heart, the one who grounded the rest through all the chaos. Beach Boys publicist Sandy Friedman said, "Carl was like a rock for the group. He was the steady one. He was the tiller." Mike Love agreed, and told Rockler in his interview that of all the hard times they'd been through as a band and a family, the hardest was the final tour with Carl, he said. After his last concert with us in Atlantic City the year before he passed away, seeing Carl Wilson take a look at all of us and say goodbye for the last time, which is basically what it was really hard to think about again. Even though their music inspired countless lifetimes of happy-go-lucky fun in the sun, the Beach Boys didn't walk an easy road. Brian Wilson and Mike Love have both talked about the early days of the band with the benefit of hindsight, and perhaps most tragic of all is that their memories are tinged with both respect and regret. In his 2016 interview with Rockler, Love said Brian had been gifted with a supercharged packet of genealogy that gave rise to his brilliance in music. While acknowledging his rocky relationship with Dennis, he also gave credit where it was due. Love said, "He was a very powerful drummer, and he had that competitive spirit." When Rolling Stone talked to Brian in 2016, he admitted that there was plenty he missed about those days, missed hanging with Dennis, for example. He missed Carl,